You're now live, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. I'd like to welcome all councillors, officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this meeting. My name's Councillor Paul Myers and I'm Chairman of the panel. I'll now call out the names of the members of the panel and I will ask them to confirm that they're actually present. So to begin with then, Councillor Winston Dogood.
Present.
Mark Elliott.
Present.
Matt McCabe.
Present.
Sean Hughes.
Present.
Hal McPhee.
Present.
Alistair Singleton.
Present.
And Karen Warrington.
Present.
Also present are a number of officers who will be introduced as we make our way through the agenda. Can I please remind members and officers to keep background noise to a minimum, to only speak one person at a time and not to speak over others. And can you please mute your microphones when not speaking and then unmute when I invite you to speak. Please indicate if you wish to speak by using the chat facility on Zoom by typing MIS, and that means may I speak, and I'll call you to speak in turn. I would ask you to bear with me, and if I appear to be missing you, please feel free, as I'm sure you will, to remind me. If a member of the panel has to leave the meeting, then please can you draw my attention to this by using the chat facility. If you subsequently return to the meeting, then please also draw my attention to this in the same way. Members should also inform me if they lose connection and miss any part of the meeting, as this may result in them not being able to vote on any item they did not hear in full. Should the panel need to take a vote, I'll read out each member's name in alphabetical order. Each member should then clearly state for, against or abstain, and this will enable the Democratic Services Officer to accurately record the vote and will also ensure that decision taking is clear to the public who are viewing on YouTube. Does anybody have any questions?
Chair, we forgot to mention Dr. Kumar, who's filling in today, and he's there on the panel.
Yes, I apologise for that. I have a very carefully crafted script to guide me, and it didn't. I think that may be about to come up under apologies. So we'll see in a moment. But welcome to you. And as I say, we'll hopefully you may hear all this covered in my very wonderful script prepared for me. So thank you for pointing that out, Winston. So there are no questions as I understand it. Yeah. And okay, and just for form's sake then, Councillor Kumar, would you like to say your name now?
Yes, my name is Yukteswar Kumar, and I'm just substituting for Andrew first, Councillor Andrew first. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So we'll now do apologies for absence. The Democratic Services Officer will now give details of any apologies for absence and substitution. So, Mark, could I ask you to cover this, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you. As you just heard, that Councillor Kumar is subbing for Councillor Furze, and we have Councillor Matt McCabe subbing for Councillor Lucy Hodge.
Splendid. So everybody is aware of that, and we'd like to welcome you both to our panel today. Right, so our next item is item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Yeah. Any member who declares a disclosable pecuniary interest or other declarable interest in any item would normally, we'd ask them to leave the room, but also leave the remote meeting. Yeah. So if you think of anything during the meeting, then please just let me know, either through the chat function or just come through and say if it's very pressing, and we'll take care of that. So item 4 is urgent business agreed by the chair, and as far as I'm aware, there is no urgent business. Excellent. So our next one is item 5, which is public and councillor statements. And I'm delighted to welcome forward now one of our regular people who visit, David Redgewell, who's registered to speak and will now address the panel. Is David here?
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. So a few issues I want to raise. Obviously remind everybody of the importance of sub-regional and regional government. Baines has effectively handed control of public transport, effectively supported by a number of us to WECA, which is the West Region Combined Authority. So it's very important we start to plan more regionally and sub-regionally. I'm also concerned about the Western Gateway Transport Board. I think that body we're less concerned. We're more concerned about its delivery of vital infrastructure for Bath and North East Somerset. We also make the point, of course, that Radstock and Midsummer Norton are right on the boundary with the Western Peninsula Transport Board. So therefore, cross-boundary working on sub-regional planning for bus services and local rail services is very important. I make the point because the consultation for that plans finished on the 31st of July. And obviously we need to make sure there are clear investments in the railway line from Bath to Weymouth via Frome and West Wiltshire down to Portsmouth Harbour. Also electrification of a line to London, as the Department of Transport begin to look at that issue again through Bath, and to make sure we pick up the vital public transport links into places like Wales, Glastonbury Street, and into is missed out by the sub-regional planning. On local transport issues, I want to pick up a couple of issues. I am very concerned about the loss of a tourist information centre in Bath, actually. I think that is an issue we need to address. I was never pleased with that building. It was never disabled accessible with ramps and things. But nevertheless, we still need to have that facility and also work with North East Somerset. I can see that a Bristol Bath tourism board works, but it needs to be very clearly identified so we don't miss out North East Somerset. An option I would put to the council is to work with Destination Bristol and perhaps look at using the bus station, which has an awful lot of space in the travel centre and possibly could have some tourist information added to it and some desk changes under COVID-19 changes, which they'll do in that bus station anyway. So there's an option, plus looking at the bus facility at Wells, which could also be used for tourist information. Of course, Somerset County Council on Wednesday pressed the button on the government reorganisation. Like, rightly or wrongly, it's going to happen. And that will then push Baines and we believe North Somerset into a review. So I'm very concerned. I did support James Heapy's idea of merging Mendip and Baines, about that would be a good authority. I think we're back in that equation, plus the future of the Transport Authority. And I think Baines must be ready to respond to that government consultation. I also draw the fact that the combined authority issues are something the government's going to look at in the autumn, and the Transport Select Committee is now looking at an inquiry into COVID-19, public transport, and the regions and the governance of the regions. And that won't be happening without the government asking that question. So there's some of the issues that are very important. I would also ask them to basic stuff that when we come to budgets and things, there is plenty, not plenty, because there's never plenty of money in Bath, the North East Somerset or any other WECA authority, but to make sure we've got the adequate money to cover the basic maintenance of bus stops and infrastructure, where that's real-time information, but particularly with COVID-19, to make sure we regularly clean the bus infrastructure and public transport infrastructure from Radstock to Midsummer Norton right through to Bath and Keynsham, because obviously COVID can exist on services for 72 hours. So we really should be doing more on cleaning and infrastructure. I think those are some of the major issues. There's still work to do with WECA about restoring the number 9 bus in Bath. We're trying to do some mid-20. Where we've got the Radstock Bristol bus back. I'm sure that'll please the chair from the weekends now via Midsummer Norton. But we've still got more to do on the 37 Bristol Bath and the 19 through Weston and Kelston up to North Bristol and the Keynsham to Cribs Causeway link. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And so members of the panel, I assume, Mark, we've noted that. And we then move on to item 7, which is our cabinet member update. Now, I understand our cabinet member is unable to attend on this occasion, but in his absence, a council officer, Richard Long, head of property, will update the panel on the 2 call-in meetings that took place earlier in the year. And once we've heard that report, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end on the update. So, Richard, could I invite you please to enter the meeting now and give the report, the update.
Right, thank you, Chair. As you just pointed out, there were 2 call-ins, and I've been invited just to provide a brief update on the recommendations as they were recorded in the amended decision following the call-in meetings. So I'll start with 23 Grosvenor Place, which contained 4 recommendations, which and I'll take each recommendation in place, and I'll then provide the commentary that goes with that. So the first item, or the first recommendation, was to consider ways of improving transparency of property decisions within the limits of commercial confidentiality. We have commenced a wider programme or work stream under the Recovery Board, looking at all aspects of property delivery. And the corporate management team project sponsor for this piece of work is Mandy Bishop. And she's currently finalising the strategic objectives for this review. However, the issues raised concerning improving transparency within commercial confidentiality limits will be reviewed as part of this exercise, and so will form part of that scope. The second recommendation was that future options for the asset should be examined as quickly as possible following the decision, and to ring fence. One of those elements is to consider ring fencing the receipt for future social housing. An options paper has been produced, and it's incorporating the ring fencing options, but the presentation to Cabinet has been delayed as a result of the role that this building played during the COVID outbreak and ongoing to provide accommodation for the homeless to self-isolate during the pandemic. Grosvenor Place played a central role in providing safe accommodation, enabling the homeless to self-isolate during the coronavirus outbreak, and all under the supervision of Julian House that we granted a licence to. The report has therefore been delayed whilst the case is being built around an additional option, which relates to the rough sleeper exit strategy and potential longer term role that this particular property might play as a permanent move-on facility. The business case is going to be dependent upon potential MCHLG funding stream, which government has announced, but there are no further details at the moment, so we're awaiting those. And as soon as they're released, it will enable us to incorporate this element within the business case, and we can then present it. The next option or recommendation was to hold discussions with Guinness, requesting whether they would be prepared to invest or reinvest the receipt within social housing within Baines. We did approach Guinness with this request to use a receipt from the reverse premium to invest it in social housing. They've advised, however, that once allowing for all the rehousing costs, the major works of repairs, which did include undertaking a structural remediation to the rear wall of the premises, together with other associated expenditure, there would actually be no funds available from the specific receipt to recycle within the area. But Guinness were very keen to stress that their commitment to Bath and North East Somerset continues, and that they confirmed that with the 470 houses in the local area or within the immediate council area, this is one of their highest priority investment localities where they will continue to invest in both their existing homes as well as seeking opportunities to build new houses. And they currently confirm that they are actively exploring a number of opportunities with developers at the present time. The final recommendation for Grosvenor was to ensure that various property functions deliver the council's new corporate priorities. This does relate back to the Recovery Board work stream that I outlined in the initial item, and will include a review of the structures, processes and core delivery model across all aspects of the council's property services, including estates, construction, maintenance and FM, and other associated activities. So that's my update on the Grosvenor call-in. did you want to consider those and take questions on that item now?
Yes, I think it's probably best if we take one at a time. I think the panel will hopefully agree on that. Otherwise, it could get very complicated.
Absolutely.
So could I thank you for that, Richard, on behalf of the panel. Could I ask members of the panel then to indicate if they'd like to speak? Are there any questions? Oh, yeah. So I've got Councillor McCabe, if you'd like to speak. And then
Thank you, Chair.
Hughes.
Okay, thank you. I know the third recommendation was discussions will be held with Guinness on reinvestment within Baines of any receipt, and of course now there is no receipt. So I was just wondering that we have no powers to influence Guinness other than they're promising an ongoing relationship. Is that correct? Is my understanding correct?
We work closely with Guinness, or my colleagues in the housing team do work closely with Guinness, and there is a strong relationship there. And as I say, Guinness were very, very keen to stress through their chief, in fact, that the strong relationship that they want to maintain within Baines, and the investment that they are making more widely, but just not through this receipt.
Okay, thank you.
Are you happy with that, or would you like to come back, Matt, at all? No, you okay?
I'm okay with that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sean, Councillor Sean Hughes.
Yeah, just a clarification, really. I mean, on this this issue with Guinness, so we're now saying that they're undertaking some work. Out of that £450,000 we're giving them, they're undertaking some refurbishment or some repair work on the building. Is that correct? Because I understood that before that they weren't actually going to be doing anything on the building at all. Would
you like to answer that, Richard?
I will, yeah. As you'll recall from the debates at the meeting, we looked at, well, the issue of dilapidations was considered, and the big problem, the issue with some of the dilapidations is that the council would envisage that to use that property for any form of alternative beneficial form, there will be what's called an element of supersession. So, and by law, we're unable to collect or pursue the tenant for those dilapidations simply because they won't exist once the refurbishment works have been carried out. These particular works were to the rear wall, so it was a structural issue that wouldn't actually fall under the supersession issues because we wouldn't be replacing the wall. So it was a disrepair that they agreed to undertake. And I think from memory, it was about £120,000.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the panel? No? Okay. So we'll now move on then, if you would, Richard, onto the second call-in, please.
Okay. This related to a disposal under the community transfer. So I was just making sure I wasn't muted. Yeah, this was a disposal that we effected under the community asset transfer programme and involved a strip of land adjoining the highway or between the highway and the Bath Cricket Club land. So again, I will simply run through the recommendations that were then incorporated in the amended decision dated 20th of February. The first item there was that a new process to identify council ownership prior to cabinet member determining planning applications be put in place or reviewed. We've actually introduced a new process which involves reviewing the weekly list of planning applications and overlaying the council's ownership records to identify any sites that involve or adjoin at any parcel of land subject to an application. Offices and estates and various other council service areas, as well as the cabinet member for resources, are then noted of any sites that are either council owned or adjacent to a council ownership that's subject to an application. And from testing it with that, as I say, that's in place, and regular reports now go to Councillor Samuel, who then involves any the cabinet as appropriate on any of the plan, any of the application sites. The second question or recommendation was that the cabinet member is satisfied that community benefits have been valued appropriately using the national themes outcomes and measures calculator. Evidence that the proposed community benefits relating to the decision have been set out in the Appendix A to the report, which I hope everyone has received a copy. But just essentially, the aim of the National TOMS framework is to provide a minimum reporting standard for measuring social value and provides a relatively easy to use and transparent solution that can be applied to most situations. The report that's contained in the appendix has been provided to Councillor Samuel, but he's yet to formally approve this appendix but the proposed lease to the cricket club will not be entered into until the cabinet member has confirmed he's satisfied with this evidence. In a similar theme, the item 3 was that the cabinet member satisfied the community that the community benefits will be enjoyed across communities right across the whole of Baines and not simply Bath. The cabinet member has yet to formally approve the evidence, but again, the lease will not be entered into until after the cabinet member has confirmed he's satisfied that all those benefits will be experienced in communities right across Bath and North East Somerset. And the final item on the community benefits was a request that a full schedule of those benefits be published. Again, it's been agreed with Councillor Samuel that we will publish details of the whole community benefits as soon as he's approved the previous items and the lease before the lease is completed. The final item was a request that the cricket club enter, or were invited to enter into a contractual arrangement to deliver the community benefits. The heads of terms, which form part A of the non-exempt appendices to the original report, made provision that the community uses are recorded as an obligation to the council and set out in a formal deed that sits with the lease and includes for annual inspection by the council to ensure the covenants are being delivered relating to the community benefit. The draft deed has now been drafted, and those provisions and the obligations have been agreed with the club and will be signed at the same time as the lease is completed. So that's my response to the 5 issues that corresponded to that particular decision as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Richard. Do any members of the panel have questions? I'm seeing yes. Councillor Elliott to start.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to query some of the numbers in Appendix A, if that's okay. Just kind of, I can't quite make them add up. I wonder if you can help me. The Appendix A says that the additional leisure community benefits as a result of the development create a value of around 2 million per annum. But then when the actual figures are laid out, there's a £210,000 per annum in total social value committed per annum. And then there's a bursary scheme of 50k per annum. And then there are various capital benefits of 1.1 million, £500,000, 200k for the Lansdowne site and 30k on a minibus. But I can't make those add up to 2 million a year. I'm just wondering where that number's come from. You're on mute, Richard.
Yeah, my apologies on that. That's an error in drafting. That's a total capital value of 2 million, not
that makes
an annual value.
So that's a present value calculation over 30 years.
It would be a present value calculation, yeah.
Okay, and over a 30-year period.
I'd have to look, and I can confirm. I can come back to you on that one. Unfortunately, I'm the author of that bit, so I will check.
Sure. 2 million value makes much more sense rather than 2 million per year.
Yeah, it's certainly not.
Yeah, but if we could have something clearer in that appendix, which makes it clear how that calculation is done, that would be really useful. Just because I think, as a public document, it ought to be crystal clear where the numbers come from.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Mark, as somebody who assists us in the committee, how could we actually incorporate that into a record? Can you put that as agreed in the minutes so it's clear, and then maybe have it that there's an updated report published for the record?
So, Chair, I currently have Richard's versions of what he sent round this afternoon. If it's a case of him just updating that with clarity on the questions that's been raised, I'm quite happy to do that. Those documents will then be appended to the minutes when they're published on the website, if that helps.
Excellent. And just conscious of you making the point, Mark, are you happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can get something that just clarifies where that number's come from, that would be great.
I'm always very keen and sort of pleased in our role that where we do scrutiny, and it's not a criticism, Richard, we're being constructive, but it's also very important in my mind as your chair to make sure we do note it when these things are highlighted. I'm not sure there's anybody else waiting, but I personally had a question more as clarification. Under the first item where it was about the process, I think I maybe more than anybody talked about, could this happen again? And there was a question response at the time, I won't say who from, whereas, well, I would hope not. And we wanted a bit more than hope that it wouldn't happen again, which is where item 1 came from. Now, it's quite some time ago now, but my understanding was that when somebody made an application that related to council land, there was a landlord's form that came in. In the answer you've given here, could you just reassure me that somehow or other then it's that piece of paper and the council's records that are being properly tied up? And whilst I know we can never guarantee something like this would never happen again, do you feel reasonable that this process would stop it happening again? I know we can't guarantee, but are you, from your professional view as an officer, do you think it's a good system?
In this particular instance, I'm sure the Ticket Club did confirm that they submitted the landlord's notice. It didn't reach us. But what the system and process that we've now put in place, I think, is a fail-safe to actually capture, because everything that appears on the weekly list now is, as I say, overlaid against our property ownership records, and we do capture not only the sites that are council sites, but anything that adjoins council sites as well. And those are circulated, and Councillor Samuel does receive a copy of that, and we do discuss them at one-to-one meetings.
So would I be right in thinking that actually the actual process that would follow, that certificate that's put in, is not really what's part of this system? This is you feel, a more effective system because we actually screen it against our records rather than trying in a large organisation to track a sheet of paper or digital sheet of paper maybe.
I think they serve different parts of the same process. One is a formal requirement, and on receipt of that notice, we normally write back to the applicant, reminding them of their obligation that they need landlord consent or landowner consent as well as planning, and that they are two separate issues. This is more of a proactive approach from us as landowners, just monitoring what applications are coming in affecting council sites. So I think they serve different approaches, but tie up in terms of ensuring that the planning and the landowner processes are joined.
Do you think, though, that in this response and in the process, reference, unless you think I'm being picky, and I'll leave it to you, reference could be made to this form that comes in? Because it was such a big part of the debate last time. I think even if we've got this better overlay system, I think it would be good to refer to it, because any subsequent panels, you know, because it won't hopefully happen again for many years, it would be good, I think, to just have a reference to that system, which is the proper legal process normally. The fact that we're doing something better Would you feel comfortable about just including that? Just a small reference that it does happen, but this is in addition to it, yeah?
Yeah, I can say it's in addition to. I wouldn't like to say it's better than the statutory process.
No, and heaven forbid.
But I can say we're introducing it to sit alongside that process, absolutely.
Yeah, I just think because it was that process we were relying on that didn't work, to come up with such a good process and not refer back to it, it would just tighten. And in no way am I being critical. It's probably been far too pernickety, but I do think it would be good to have it there. Do other panel members understand what I'm saying? Because I'm not an expert in planning law, but there we go. All right, well, look, are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions there. So the last call, no? Otherwise, Richard, thank you very, very much for coming today and taking us through that. I think overall, it's encouraging, I would say. Can I, on behalf of the panel, that our recommendations have been gone through, because a lot of work went into that. And one of the most important things is to learn from things that go wrong, and that can be very, very positive in the end, because it can improve things in the future. So that's excellent. So thank you to you and your officers for addressing that, and also to the cabinet member for following through on this, on the work of the panel. So on that happy note, I believe I would normally say at this point we could move forward from the cabinet member update, but in actual fact, Mark, supporting me as ever, has pointed out that I inadvertently missed item 6. So we'll just nip back, and I'd like to put forward that we need to approve the minutes of the 30th of June. So can I please confirm these as a true record? So Mark, you'd like me, wouldn't you, to go round and just get everybody to say yes? Is that all right?
Don't need to, Chair. If we're all just happy, then they can just be approved.
Okay, well, if people just show a hand that have got the chance to vote, yes, that's all those in favour, and we have got everybody in agreement, I believe, yeah? So thank you very, very much for that, and apologies as your chair for missing that important item, but we've covered it now. So I'm now pleased to move on to agenda item 8, which is an assessment of the council's business income and where we are now. And I'd like to invite Andy Rothery, an officer, to present the report and show presentation slides. Then I'll invite members to ask questions of Andy, and we'll use the chat facility as we have been doing. And then when we've done all the questions, then we'll actually go into a debate, okay? I'll just clarify for Zoom purposes, should there be a motion recommendation, I'll ask for it to be seconded, and we've got time for debate, and then any amendments on that will be moved one at a time, and we'll work through our meeting in that way. So if I might therefore ask Andy Rothery to take the Zoom floor, and I believe you've got a presentation you can put up on screen now, is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just navigate screen sharing and get this shared. Also, through the presentation, I'll be inviting colleagues. So Simon Addison from Heritage Services will be joining me to talk through the heritage income position, and also Andy Dunn, the Parking Services Manager, will be looking at the Parking Services income position with the panel, and also David Shaturi will be joining to wrap up the presentation. So I'll just share this now. Could everyone confirm they can see that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Andy, just before you start, Councillor Warrington, could I just check that you want to speak after the presentation?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
And apologies to Councillor Moss, who I just sent that note to for Karen. So there we go. So over to you, Andy, and sorry for the interruption.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the presentation really gives an overview and a summary of things we've already talked through with the panel, which is putting a spotlight on the 2021 budget, looking at the expenditure and income of the council and how it's been affected by COVID-19, and then also putting the focus on more detail on heritage services and also parking services to help the panel see in more detail how the service has been affected by COVID, and also how some of the response is going in terms of our income levels. So starting off, I want to start on an overview of our expenditure. So this is total expenditure across the council. So it's a very simple graph breaking it down into 4 quadrants, showing where a lot of our money goes on adults, children's and public health, 144 million. Within our expenditure, we also administer funding to schools through the dedicated schools grant. A large part of our services are in the third quarter, which is what I've classified as services to the public. So this includes highways, refuse collection, cleansing and parks, housing services, amongst a number of other services across the council. And then I've also categorised our expenditure by corporate budgets. So within here, it's things like our tariff payment for business rates back to government, the funding of our capital programme is in here, the revenue repayment, and also housing benefits payments and administration of that service. Now we fund that 352 million by a range of sources. Many people, I think, sometimes assume that the council is fully funded by council tax and business rates, but that's under half of our funding, 160 million. We also have a number of grants that come in, specific grants such as the public health grant and other adult social services grants that add up to 49 million. Now, what we're really going to be discussing in a bit more detail later is some of our income that we generate, where we're more unique in Baines from the high level of income we generate across fees and charges from parking services, tourism income from the Roman baths, and our commercial estate income. And we also have other income from government, so tariff payments to us from government that equate to 27 million. And we also have the straight pass through of the schools grant that I touched on earlier. That's the same value in the expenditure. So very early on with the COVID lockdown and restrictions, our income budgets were heavily impacted. So our first 2 periods of the year, the first 2 months, this is specifically across heritage services and parking, we're 5.6 million down, doing a straight comparison of income generated in those services this year to income generated in the services for the same period last year. That equates to £91,000 a day of income that we're reliant on to fund our services. Breaking those numbers down in a bit more detail, we can see that our initial assessment of our deficit, and it's remained fairly close to this, is a 42 million pressure across the council. This is before any mitigation, so this is gross pressure on the council as a result of COVID, which is largely made up by 32 million impact of forecast under recovery of income and 10 million of expenditure pressures for new costs in response to COVID-19. So this really relates to the pie chart I showed earlier, showing that this is the income that's at risk. So you can see in terms of total income that we require to finance our budget, we have a large section at risk, which really relates to the next set of slides that we'll look at in specific purposes at heritage services and parking. Before I move on to that, though, I just want to touch on our recovery plans to date. So we've been very proactive in terms of making sure that we can stabilize our finances, because having that level of income exposure is something that needs to be addressed in year. What we can't do is wait for further funding. Whilst we welcome further funding, it is very important very early on to get forwards and produce a recovery plan that will help mitigate our in-year position and stabilise our finances so we can fully fund our 2021 budget. So the first line here is the projected deficit. The second line is the 20.7 million of recovery measures that were presented to the panel in the last meeting. And then we have the confirmed government grant. This has now changed slightly because we have the further funding package, which has added another 1.3 million of unring-fenced grants. So that can be used to help deal with the in-year impact of COVID-19. And government has also launched an income compensation scheme. We're waiting for the full detail of that scheme, but it will allow us to recover 75p in a pound of irrecoverable income. So that applies to heritage services, parking services, and other income areas where we recover income through fees and charges. What it doesn't apply to is commercial estate income. So that's a welcome scheme because of our income exposure, and it will help us because our claim will add to our recovery measures, because we've shown that the recovery plan will enable us to balance the budget. Without that, with that, it reduces our reliance on reserves and will enable us to look at our recovery plans a bit more broadly and also add some flexibility. So I'm going to now pass on to Simon to talk through the heritage income position. We have a few slides for Simon to go through.
Thank you, Andy. Chair, I'd like to start by outlining the build up to the closure of the Heritage Services sites, and then discuss our reopening modelling, and then conclude by summarising our financial mitigation actions. We first saw a decline in Mandarin speaking visitors around the Lunar New Year period, and at that point began discussing what we thought was a trend linked to Asian visitors with other UK visitor attractions, particularly those who see a high number of Chinese visitors. And at that point, there was no other impact on any section of our visitor base. Come February, we saw a number of cancellations from Italian and French school groups who typically visit us in the spring. And these came as governments across Europe introduced bans on overseas school groups. And as we moved into March, the situation continued to evolve at pace. We kept senior officers updated with the impacts, and a range of scenarios were developed and updated. By mid-March, it became clear that it was no longer responsible to our staff, visitors, nor to residents of Bath and North East Somerset to remain open, and officers recommended the closure of the Roman Baths, Fashion Museum and Victoria Art Gallery to the Leader of the Council through the Chief Executive. And this decision was approved, and we closed on the 18th of March ahead of a national lockdown which was introduced the following week. And at the point of our site's closure, COVID-19 had cost Heritage Services approximately £450,000 in lost revenue in the previous financial year. Heritage sites remained closed through Q1 of the 2021 financial year, a period during which we would have expected to welcome 430,000 visitors and generate £6.7 million of admission revenue. And the chart in this slide shows the average daily revenue generated at the Roman Baths during 2019. The bars were closed for a period when we would have expected to generate between £50,000 and £80,000 of admission income per day. And the capacity restrictions on reopening mean that admission revenue generated during July and August will be significantly less than the £80,000 per day generated during this period in 2019. And if you could move to the next slide, please. Planning for reopening started as soon as the doors were closed on the 18th of March, with a range of scenarios developed, looking at different reopening dates, different demand levels, and different combinations of sites opening. These scenarios were informed by sentiment research commissioned by the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, past performance of the Roman Baths, Fashion Museum and Victoria Art Gallery following crises, albeit we've not reopened following a pandemic before, and our own assessment of our ability to deliver a COVID-secure visit and the level of capacity restriction that we might need to implement in order to achieve this. It became clear that it would be very difficult to reopen the Victoria Art Gallery with one-way routes, which are vital in maintaining the safety of staff and visitors. It was also clear that the underground, enclosed nature of the Fashion Museum was not aligned to what the research told us visitors wanted on returning to attractions. For these reasons, the reopening scenario that was recommended to the Recovery Board was to reopen the Roman Baths on the 6th of July and to reopen the Fashion Museum and Victoria Art Gallery for Easter 2021. This scenario recommended the continued delivery of corporate hire and wedding business from the assembly rooms during the 2020 and 2021 financial year as government restrictions allow us. This scenario was approved by the Recovery Group. Other key features of the scenario are that visitors at the Roman Baths will be restricted to no higher than 30% of our normal capacity, whilst physical distancing is required, and that on reopening, we restricted this to less than 30% to allow us to test operational procedures. The projected demand on reopening was 10% of our normal visitor numbers for July, and growth to 65% of our normal visitor numbers by the end of the financial year. And the chart here shows the income generated through this scenario in grey, compared to the prepared budget shown in blue. And as well as the obvious impact on our overall revenue, I wanted to highlight the particular impact in the summer where our normal visitor numbers are higher and our prices are higher. It's a non-linear budget in heritage services. And so even a strong winter will not allow us to recover the income that we've lost through the winter, through the summer period. And the final slide, please, Andy. So moving on to talk about our expenditure budget and the mitigations. We have a net expenditure budget of £13.2 million, and the pie chart shows the shape of this budget, with the largest section being employee costs. In this financial year, Heritage Services had budgeted to generate a surplus of £9.7 million for the council from this cost base. And we know from benchmarking within the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions that we run the most efficient site at converting income to profit within this cohort of the UK's visitor attractions. A feature of this high profitability is that our cost base is lean and savings are more challenging to find. However, as a service, we've identified savings of £2.5 million, which represent 19% of the expenditure budget. And the bar chart on the right-hand side of the slide shows the nature of these savings. There are a number of savings which fall out as a result of lower business volumes. For example, retail stock purchase, credit card charges, and audio guide costs are all directly proportional to the visitor volume, and we will obviously see lower numbers of visitors this financial year. Secondly, we've deferred or cancelled a number of planned activities. And finally, we've seen some staff savings. These staff savings have come in two principal forms. We've moved all visitor experience staff from the Fashion Museum and Victoria Art Gallery to the Roman Baths, which will reduce our need for casual and seasonal staff through the rest of this financial year. And secondly, we've made savings through the coronavirus job retention scheme. It's worth pointing out that the rules on this scheme have been fast changing, and initially local authorities were not able to furlough staff. This rule was changed following lobbying through the Local Government Association and also the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions. Nevertheless, this delayed the furloughing of staff. It's also important to note that there are a number of staff from Heritage Services who were redeployed to help the council meet the challenge of the pandemic. Our staff were redeployed in waste services, bereavement services, grant assessments, and in the hub preparing food packages which were delivered to the shielding households in Bath and North East Somerset. We were pleased to be able to help and proud to help the delivery of these critical services during this time, but it did mean that fewer staff were furloughed than might have been otherwise the case in order to avoid increased costs in other services. Finally, Chair, I would like to highlight that unlike most museums around the country, we've been unable to access the business rate relief specifically designed for the sector in which we operate. This is because local authorities are prohibited from accessing this relief, which will be worth £900,000 to Bath and North East Somerset Council in respect of the Roman Baths and Assembly Rooms locations. This has been a point of lobbying to both DCMS and MHCLG, and Bath and North East Somerset Council has been specifically highlighted in evidence given to the DCMS committee by the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions. But to date, there's been no movement on this issue, although MHCLG may point to the fees and charges scheme that Andy referenced as a way that they have addressed these points. Thank you, Chair. I think I'm now handing on to Andy Dunn to talk about parking services.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Chair. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So I'm just going to go through a number of slides talking about the situation within parking, and that's going to cover firstly an overview, then I'm going to touch on expenditure and savings, and then give an impact on the pay and display position, which is by far the largest area within parking. So on the first slide here, so the lockdown affected the total flow of vehicles on the network. There was approximately a 70% reduction in vehicle movements across all the sites within Bath and North East Somerset. And parking raises approximately £11 million in total income from all of the services it provides. So this lockdown had a significant impact across all of their income streams, particularly as charges and enforcement activity was paused. The only income we received during the lockdown period was through historic PCN income. And this change continues to be reflected with a reduction in bustling PCNs currently of about 50% against the pre-COVID situation. And this, of course, as you can see there, is down to 80% at New Bond Street, which was further impacted by the mitigation measures on Milsom Street. If I could have the next slide, please, Andy. Thank you. So the financial impact itself of lockdown. So we saw a 20% recovery against our quarter 1 budget so far this financial year, and that's projected to lead to a forecast loss of 62%, or the £7.2 million indicated previously by Andy in the full year. If I could go to the next slide, please, Andy. Thank you. So just now to review expenditure. We have a net expenditure budget of about £4.4 million. You can see there that almost 50% of this spend is through staffing. This emphasises the importance of having staff members, individuals on patrol out there visible in the community. And those members of staff have continued to be on deployment throughout the lockdown, albeit on reduced forms, helping to keep the network moving and support the emergency services and vulnerable people during these times. They've also been supporting the mobile testing unit for COVID up at Odd Down, and also ensuring collections and deliveries of vital PPE to residential homes and other vulnerable organisations and groups that have been maintained. You'll see our other significant costs there are both maintenance of assets and additionally an NDR. So these generally are fixed costs. However, we have been able to identify a number of saving opportunities in both these areas. This includes through the reduction of maintenance, short-term maintenance across some of our assets, which have had reduced use during this time, a change to blue badge processes, and more greatly, the management of existing vacancies throughout the service. This has allowed us to put forward a saving in this financial year of about 14% of our revenue budget. If I could have the next slide, please, Andy. So now moving on to pay and display income. Pay and display income makes up approximately £7.7 million of all of our income, so it's by far the largest contributor to what we generate as a service. Recovery started for us on the 4th of May, which was when the charges were reintroduced and we started to begin our enforcement action again on the street. Since then, we've continued to both regularly monitor usage and income on a near daily level, as you can see from this data shown here. We've had a steady increase in pay and display income from the introduction of the charges. And it's now moved to the point where we're offset against 2019 income, calculated on a rolling 7-day average of about £7,000 against previous levels, which represents represents a 33% reduction, or a total of 67% against that level. With traffic flow now back to about 80% of where it was pre-COVID, this isn't exactly reflected within car parks, and that's shown by a reduction in income. So car parks are operating around about 60%, 66%, apologies, of pre-COVID levels, but we've actually seen a yield per space value of around about 70%. So that's greater, and what that indicates is that there's actually a change in behaviour in people that are using the car parks, indicating that there is significantly less long duration stays within the car parks. And this is also recognised within the breakdown of usage over the day. So I think the main impact on that has been, of course, the nighttime economy, where we've noticed that actually the number of stays towards the last part of the day are significantly reduced against 2019. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you. Oh, have you got more slides?
Yeah, we have one more. I'm just going to, so David Trethewey is going to wrap up for us, and then we'll open up.
Yeah. So yeah, just as sort of as Simon and Andy have pointed out, what we've been doing in those particular income areas, that also across the whole organisation, we've had to do series of budget mitigations, and you've seen these gone through cabinet now over up to £20 million in our in-year recovery plans. And obviously now what we're now working through, as Andy mentioned earlier, is what access we can get to the government income reimbursement scheme for these activities. And the headline is that we can get 75p in every pound of lost income. But again, they're in-year mitigations. So the longer term issue is how we're going to look at and redo our income budgets for future years to reflect, what the future likely demand is. But also, I guess, given the changes in the nature of the economy and the nature of people coming to Bath and North East Somerset, what is the implications of that on our medium-term financial strategy? So I think the message is at the moment we're working very strongly to stabilise this year's budget, but we're beginning to then look at what the implications those are for future years. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we're now returning to full Zoom. So thank you for those presentations. Can I ask if any members of the panel would like to speak? I've got Councillor McCabe to start.
Me again. I just wanted to ask Heritage Officer, what sort of normal staff to visitor ratio would we be working at, and what is it now, and what's sustainable in your view?
I need to get back to you with the exact figures, but from memory, we generate approximately £50,000 per staff member, and clearly at the moment that's not possible with the level of restrictions. We think that we can operate to around 30% capacity, but whilst we have physical distancing requirements, the staffing needs to keep visitors safe haven't fallen significantly. But what I would say is we are making a positive financial contribution by reopening the Roman Baths. So every day that it is open, it contributes positively towards the council finances. But I couldn't give you off the top of my head a figure for how much that is per day.
Okay, so if may I come back to you?
Yeah,
sure.
Certainly.
So you would normally have one member of staff per X number of visitors going around any of our venues. But what you're saying, if I'm right, is that actually the requirements to ensure everything's safe has actually required the number of staff to the number of visitors so I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but you're saying that the COVID requirements mean we now need more staff to actually have a fewer number of visitors. Is that right?
I probably didn't express it particularly well. We don't need more staff, but we need the same number of staff for a lower number of visitors. So the roles and responsibilities of staff have changed in order to deliver a COVID secure workplace. So whereas staff may have been delivering guided tours or engaging with visitors in certain ways, those duties have changed to ensure that we are maintaining physical distancing as people go around the museum, to hold people at certain points where you can't pass without seeing what's ahead of you. So the roles and responsibilities of our staff have changed. We don't have more staff than we normally would in July, but we do have fewer visitors.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Our next speaker is Alistair Singleton, please.
Thank you, Chair. One for parking services. Could I just clarify my own understanding? The reference to busgate income down by 80%. What is busgate income exactly?
Apologies, the reference I should have given was the number of contraventions through the busgate. But busgate income specifically is the income that the council receives from a motorist who has gone through the busking. So typically on average, the council will generate about £30 per PCN it issues. But of course it doesn't, that income's never guaranteed. It's not until that PCN has been paid by the recipient that we can count it, because it can be cancelled at any time.
Gosh. Could I pick up on that? I mean, I just sort of, it seems we're almost being motivated for people to break the law. I mean, and there are various other places in and around the town where there are bus lanes and things where there are cameras which pick up contraventions. Do we also have those in our budgets? Do we have expectations on what we'll be receiving?
We do, of course, set a target. We do, of course, set a budgetary target against those restrictions, simply for the purposes of allowing us to manage our finances. However, there is no income target. Similarly, my officers for PCNs, when they issue on the street, they also don't have an income target. We only ever qualify and count the income until it's been received, because it can be cancelled any length of time. So we simply only use it for comparative purposes, just to help us with financial management.
Okay.
Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, both for Andy Rothery, I think. First is just a general question about the first pie chart you put up. We often hear a figure of for the spend on adults, children's social services budget at 83% of the total council spend. And I'm never quite sure what percentage of what number that is. And it obviously doesn't correspond to what you're putting on that pie chart. So can you just clarify that for me, just so that I understand what numbers we're talking about? And the second question was around the shape of the recovery plan. We obviously understand what the current plan looks like with the income, the income from government at around 10 million, where we've got roughly half from savings, and then half from government grant, and then half from a quarter from government grant, a quarter from reserves, roughly. When the shape of that is changed because more money comes in from government, what's the process for deciding how that will change? I'm just interested in where that decision lies. Is it cabinet, or is it cabinet member, or chief exec? Where does it sit?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Elliott. So the first one, so the percentage proportions when you look at gross budget are different for adults and children's expenditure, because the broad terms, the sort of the 80% or 80p in a pound is when we look at our net budget, which is 118 million. So if we look at the sort of the differences between the two, we've got net budget is netted down because of granted income, which shows it's the budget that we fund from our council tax and business rates and a few other funding sources. So that's 80p in the pound is a proportion of the net budget, the net adult social care and children's services budget, when compared to our total net budget of 118 million. Okay. I hope that clarifies on that question.
Yeah, thank you.
So with any further changes in terms of grant settlement and also our income claim, the process that we'd go through would be a further update to cabinet through another financial update, whether that's through our quarterly budget monitoring, that then would allow that sort of scope to be revisited in terms of the recovery plans that cabinet have already signed off on.
Okay, so cabinet would be required to sign off. Full cabinet would be required to sign off on any change to that plan.
Absolutely, because cabinet have signed off on the plan as it is, and effectively given delegation to officers to deliver the recovery plan. Any changes to that would go back through a cabinet process.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Warrington, please.
Thank you, Chair. Andy, Andy Rothbury, you mentioned, and it's been mentioned a number of times in various meetings, that Bath and North East Somerset are unique. And I'm just want a quick clarification, because that's because of the percentage of income that we get from heritage parking and our commercial estates. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are other councils who have similar reliance, but we are, one of the few who have the high level of exposure that we do from the historic income levels we've generated as a council.
Right. Okay. And do you know what some of the other local authorities are doing? I mean, are there some lessons that maybe we can learn there?
I'm talking regularly with neighbouring Section 151 officers to compare strategies and notes, and we're working very consistently, I'd say, in terms of our in-year recovery action plan, probably ahead of some authorities. Other councils, not directly our neighbouring councils, but I'm aware some other councils have taken forward some quite hard in-year measures around staffing cuts. Some of that was in advance of the government support package, so I'd imagine those councils might revisit some of that because of having a little bit more flexibility. But I'm regularly speaking to neighbouring Section 151 officers to ensure, well, we're working very closely together because we want to be consistent in our recovery actions also.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy.
Councillor Kumar now.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering about the two things, the FM and RVG, the Fashion Museum and the Royal Victoria Gallery. Have we looked into any other option for reopening this earlier? Any other measures? I understand there's one way go, exit is different, entrance and exits are same, so it will be a bit difficult, but any other plans, loads of sanitizers, or a bit of giving a rule that 2 meters or 2.5 meters and all those kind of things, any other way so that we can generate the income. Money is very, very important. So I was just thinking, so that I know there would be, but just that's what I wanted to learn. And my second question, which is a bit convoluted as well, that recently, not only because of the problems in the world and China and COVID-19 virus, but the interface between the, let me put it this way, democratic countries and communist country like China is going downhill. And this should continue, at least in my opinion, as I work on China till 5th or 4th of November, till US elections. So apart from COVID restrictions, I believe that the Chinese or Mandarin speaking speakers, because of recent Huawei, Hong Kong law and all those kind of things, the Chinese are not very happy, particularly with the USA, but this will have impact even in the UK. And I know I don't have any data, but I know there are many visitors from China during the summer because it's very, very hot in northern part of China, including Beijing, and summer is beautiful here in the UK. So can we think of some alternate ways, like the Chinese way of doing, lowering the prices, advertising more to attract people from other parts of the world, that in general, let's say, the admission fees is £20, but this year a bit low, 10%, 20% concession, so that we attract more visitors. And my final thing is, I'm sure, again, this is a kind of question which I want to know, that because Roman baths, we also give this beautiful venue to many organizations for hiring, is not it, for marriages, and also for validation party, or at the University of Bath also has used it, because last year or previous year we used it for the graduation parties in the evening. And I'm sure there would be loss because of this as well. So can you confirm there is loss because of that, or did we give to the University of Bath free of cost or something? I just wanted to know, because obviously this is financial matter and I never had this opportunity to understand. I'm sorry for the long question, but I was just a bit intuitive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I answer the question on the Fashion Museum and the Victoria Art Gallery first, so yes, you're absolutely right that the modelling did look at a range of options, and the restricted numbers that we would need to maintain in order to comply with the current level of government guidance. It's not possible to know how that will play out through the rest of the year. So, a complete relaxation of physical distancing requirements may change that picture. However, the ability to redeploy visitor experience staff from the Fashion Museum and the Victoria Art Gallery has saved £230,000 of additional staffing costs from the Roman Baths during this financial year, and it's my belief that the saving that delivers will exceed the revenue that we will be able to generate whilst those sites had such a high capacity restriction. If I move on to your second question about the varying levels of demand from international audiences, you're absolutely right. We do see a large number of Chinese visitors. It's our second biggest international audience behind the US, and then the other large section of our international audience is mainland Europe. And each of those three markets make up about 10 to 15% of the Roman Baths annual visitor numbers. So in 2019, we had in the region of 115,000 Mandarin-speaking visitors. Each of those overseas markets will have a different forecast for their recovery, and we are working to sort of plot out what that looks like. But we won't be making the same assumptions for our US market and our Chinese market, partly for some of the reasons that you've outlined. So yes, we're looking at that, and there is a significant domestic market that we might be able to use to replace that international audience. Our domestic market currently has significant reservations about getting on an aeroplane, and are seeking domestic alternatives to foreign breaks. And we also know that the Baths perform particularly well at times when people are seeking to avoid large cities. Bath is perceived as quite small and quite accessible, and we think that this will place us well compared to other urban attractions. And finally, your point about pricing and whether we ought to look at reducing pricing. Currently, with such restricted capacity, I anticipate that we will have demand close to our capacity for the next few weeks, if not months. So whilst we've got high demand relative to our capacity, there's no economic sense to reduce the price. If we see low levels of demand, then we will of course review our pricing. But last week we sold 87% of our available tickets without needing to discount. So I don't think it's a strategy that is right to consider at this point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I was quite interested to ask myself some questions about the future trends, because clearly COVID has changed things and it's not coming back. And as long ago as a year last January, I was in Berlin discussing tourism with other tourism spa towns across Europe. And even then, the trends were that the millennial interest and what they were going to be looking for over time was going to affect the long-term market. So in terms of COVID, in the last question answer, you've already covered in a sense this idea of Bath being a smaller city and with foreign travel being an issue, that the knock-on effect is UK people coming more. But equally, I've read that even UK people are looking very much more at rural locations and not, using hotels and using self-catering. So what have you begun thinking about those very, very long-term trends? And, is there any evidence, of reports in the public domain that you're aware of?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that some of those long-term trends are things that we're starting to consider, but are difficult at this point to forecast. In the reopening scenario that we prepared, we were projecting to be at 65% of a normal demand level by the end of this financial year. So that would be a starting point for forward planning. But I think you're also right to highlight that visitor trends and wants are changing. And we recognise that our success in recent years has been built on an assumption of continued high visitor numbers at the Roman Baths. We recognise that in our recovery, we've got the opportunity to seek to maximise revenue from individuals admission pricing, but also look at how we can support secondary spend through product differentiation for individuals, providing opportunities for customers who might want to pay more to access more. And we'll seek to diversify our product offering through the development and introduction of some new products which can be delivered to small numbers of people outside the day offer, but for relatively high margins. We're also exploring the creation of online retail offers so that visitors from abroad who may not be able to get to the Roman Baths at the moment, but might still want to purchase product, can do so. And finally, there is an opportunity in wedding business. So whilst large scale weddings remain quite challenging, the Roman Baths offers an intimate venue for weddings. And we've already seen quite a significant increase in demand for our sunrise and sunset weddings as people seek to either rebook from larger venues that have been cancelled or to book small weddings whilst weddings of 100+ people are less appealing at the moment.
If I could just chair myself with two supplementaries. But the first of those is, given our climate emergency objectives, one of the concerns I have of a long-term trend of trying to get people from the UK is that to in any way replace the income, if that is an objective, then obviously it's going to take more visitors and all that actual pollution. To what extent have you actually begun, or are you able to begin looking at the very long-term idea that you could visit the Roman Baths and have a virtual reality experience without actually maybe having to be there? And my second part of the question is with regard to the staff, in the short term, it's obviously very commendable to move people around and have them do food parcels. But in a sense, there's an income level we pay, quite rightly, for certain skills. In the short term, we can afford to pay maybe higher rates for people to do all sorts of different jobs. But you described guides and then people showing people the way. Over time, are you going to be able to rebalance skills and costs in your business staff cost makeup? How you put it together?
So in terms of taking that second question first, I think it is our expectation that in the long term, as you've put it, the need for physical distancing should pass with the event of vaccines, and so we would move to a model where we didn't need to have staff fulfilling those duties. If that position changes and the need for a much longer term offer, that looks very different to what people have traditionally seen at the Roman Baths, continues, then of course we will review our structure and our staffing, but we have no immediate plans to do that. Our redeployment to other services was in order to help those services meet a critical need in responding to the pandemic. And I guess had we not done that, those services would have faced increased cost pressures because those roles needed doing. So it wasn't a long-term solution, but it was a way that we could play a part in supporting the council respond to that crisis. And in terms of your question about digital content, it is one that we've started to think about, but in the planning of the reopening, it has definitely taken a second priority because we will never generate as much money through digital content as we will do through walk up. So the priority was to get the Roman Baths reopen, but we will then explore options for monetizing a digital offer as part of our business plan, which we would bring forward to Cabinet in the early new year.
Okay, thank you. If I can invite Councillor Dogood now to speak.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions. First one for Simon. You're projecting in July, I think you said 10% of normal revenue. Just wondered what we're tracking in July. Andy Dunn. Andy, what's an NDR? I've forgotten if you ever told me. I think you mentioned an NDR, so you always get me on the acronyms. And third, time for Mr. Rothery to think about this one. We've got an indication of this 75p in the pound. So what's 31.72 becoming? I mean, look, Councillor Samuel isn't here, Mr. Godfrey isn't here. Give us some sort of parameters, Andy. Where are we tracking that 31.72? Where are some sort of parameters of where that might be, that financial gap?
Thank you, Councillor. At the end of week 3 of our reopening, we, on total income, generated a 1% of the ahead of the remodelled figures. The key features are that visitor demand has been stronger than initially predicted, but we were unable to reopen the pump room on the 6th of July. That we have a soft working date that we're working to. Hopefully we'll be confirming that publicly in the next week, but the announcements from the Chancellor on reduction of VAT have made it easier for our catering providers to reopen. So our higher visitor numbers have allowed us to make up for the shortfall in catering concession income that was built into the scenario, and we are tracking 1% ahead of our remodelled revenue figures.
Okay, Councillor Hughes now.
Oh yes, just a general clarification, make sure I understand these numbers. So this income compensation scheme that we're definitely entitled to claim under. So we can claim back 75 pence in every £1 on the loss of heritage income and the loss of parking income. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think I'll do hopefully a double answer here to also answer Councillor Duguid's question to me. So in terms of, we haven't got the granular detail in terms of every type of income that's in the scheme and what's out of the scheme, but our headline assessment is that any sort of contractual commercial income that's out, income through fees and charges, so that could be licensing, it could be weddings, it could be heritage and parking, those are in the scheme, and potentially planning applications also. So at quite a high level, we have started assessing what our claim might look like whilst we're waiting for the guidance. So we're really anticipating at the moment, out of that broad sort of 30 million loss of income, because a lot of that, well, some of that's not included. We expect our claim to be in the region of around or up to 15 million. But that's a very caveated number because we do need to go through that guidance and run the numbers. What it won't be is a one-off claim. This will be a process that's done kind of on arrears quarterly, but that's an assumption, still waiting for the guidance from government. Okay, so oh, sorry. But what I was just going to say, what that does leave us still is a significant recovery requirement in terms of our budget position, because of we still are heavily exposed to risk on commercial estate, and the fact that our income is so large, we can't claim for all of it. So we're still going to have a large exposure to the part we can't claim. So there will still need to be significant recovery measures.
Okay, so so if we're looking at, I mean, I remember going back to the recovery reports, there was a red, amber and green scenarios for for how much income we were going to get. So I'm guessing this moves us from the red section up to the green section.
No, we're in the amber. We're firmly in the amber scenario, yeah.
Okay, so does this mean then, because obviously, I mean, there's been some quite big changes in numbers then if this happens, both in terms of this, and I believe that we've now changed the 2.84 million that was going to be to do with the salary budget savings. I think that's now been removed, hasn't it?
Yeah, so to break down the numbers, and the reason I say we're firmly in the amber is because whilst that claim seems, or is significant in terms of our estimate, our recovery plan was still utilising reserves, and that was in the region of 11 million. So what this will allow us to do is minimise our call on reserves, which is, is one-off money. So that will help a lot in terms of financial planning, because it will allow us to look at reserves when the work comes through on the future financial strategy to ensure best use in terms of ongoing recovery. But what this means is we're still very much reliant on the revenue recovery measures.
Okay, so just sorry, sorry, just one final clarification. So, so this additional money that we receive, are you saying that that's going to be going back into the reserves, or is that going to be, is it going to, for example, deal with the issues that we had with reductions in adult services and resource and all of those things?
It will go into our revenue budget to prevent the reliance on using reserves, and also give the Cabinet the opportunity to start looking at the revenue recovery plans on the table and potentially reprioritising some of those. So in terms of impact on adult social services, and then we touched on staffing also around, softening the requirement in, some fairly significant in-year staffing savings.
Okay,
that's temporary.
Okay. I have now a question. I've been made aware that Councillor Robin Moss, who isn't on the panel, but who is a councillor, has caught my eye as he would be in the chamber to ask a question at my discretion. And so I've decided to allow this. So it's not to enter a debate for the panel knowledge, but it is to answer a sort of factual question. So Robin, would you like to ask your question now, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak. It's a question about local visitors to the Roman Baths. If a local and have a discovery card, we get free entry, and I know that we've extended that slightly post lockdown. Is there going to be? Is there a noticeable increase in local visitors who are getting in for free, and is this number financially significant? And will we be looking at how we can manage that process? Because clearly every visitor who comes in actually costs us in terms of allowing people in. Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Moss. I think Simon has left the meeting, so I won't be able to give the detailed facts on this, but to be able to get the answer back to you. My understanding in terms of the strategy for local visitor discounts is to encourage local people, especially with the discovery cards, to come and bring relatives who don't live in the area, so to bring paying customers with them. So I'll have to ask Simon to get back with that conversion factor of what what every discovery card entrance equates to in terms of paying visitor alongside the discovery card entrance.
Mark, if I could ask you to make a note of that, and we'll refer to it, if not in the minutes, as an aside somehow, and we'll deal with that to cover off Robin's question. I'm very conscious of time. I've got two more speakers. If we could try to keep these short, because we've got the rest of the agenda to get through. So I've got Mark and then Matt, and then unless somebody's dying to ask a question, I propose to close this one there. So Mark, if I could ask for, I know we've had some very detailed questions, but if you could be fairly brief, that'd be great.
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. Just to follow up really on the, when I asked my question about the change in the shape, you said yes, it would be a decision that would go to Cabinet. You've just responded to Councillor Hughes by saying that the money will be used to pay down reserves. Those two things don't quite seem compatible because one prejudices the other.
The officer recommendation would be that we don't create over-reliance on reserves, but that would be subject to approval.
Okay.
But very skillfully handled there, diplomatic, but you're happy there, Mark. And Matt. And I appeal for brevity.
Just following up on Councillor Moss's question, has anyone ever considered charging a small admin fee for a discovery card, like £5? Because obviously one trip to the baths and you're already benefiting financially.
It's a very good question. Can we take that one away, Mark, and add that onto the list, and we'll get back to you.
But I think as long as we're clear, that's an independent councillor question, because it does have it's a wider ramification, if you don't mind there, Matt. But just as an individual question, and note that if you would, Mark. So on that note, I do feel we have to move on because we've got the agenda. I'd like to thank those officers and Simon who've now left us for their input today. And you'll see that we've got this continuing themes in our work plan going forward. So I therefore propose we move forward to our next agenda item, which is a capital programme update. Okay, and could I invite Andy Rothery to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So really, for today's discussion on the capital programme, also Simon Martin's joining me. I really just want to give an overview of how we've approached the review of the capital programme, some of the governance that's been put in place to enable that review, and also ongoing officer oversight of some of the management of the capital programme. And then we'll be opening up questions to the panel if there's any specific questions about the capital review and the appendices in the report. So the review started quite early on of the capital programme when we fully understood the COVID lockdown restrictions and the fact that parts of the capital programme, definitely through April and also May, certain parts of that programme had to be paused because of just practicalities, because there were due to the restrictions, things that couldn't happen. So that was really one of the driving forces, alongside the financial position of the council in terms of cost exposure and income exposure, to carry out a fuller review of the capital programme. So to support that, a capital strategy group was set up, and this is a officer group that involves myself, Simon, and also David and a number of other directors to provide officer governance and oversight. So that enables a kind of a coordinated approach to looking at the programme, also understanding and doing an impact assessment on a number of schemes to come up with the recommendations to the portfolio holders in the cabinet around doing a sensible rephasing of the programme, because that enables a couple of things, just practicalities around a more sensible delivery timetable, and also has enabled a one-off saving from our capital financing costs that we fund out of our revenue budget for paying for is the repayment of the borrowing that we take out. So that's one of the the benefits of doing this review, is we've come up with a much more sort of attuned delivery profile across a number of schemes, and that forms the basis of the proposal that went to cabinet as part of the recovery plan. Just going to hand over to Simon, just to join me on this one as well, just to give a bit of sort of insight into some of the work and the approaches taken to the review process.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so pre-COVID, we actually had a capital programme of some 168 lines of project activity approved in the February budget. And that capital programme is funded through a number of funding sources, a significant proportion being government grant and income sources of capital. So basically, we undertook a review to try and ensure that we could continue to deliver a significant capital programme, but reducing the impact on the revenue impact on the authority through its borrowing requirements to fund its own capital programme, and have refined the capital programme into a number of themes that then enable us to reduce that borrowing requirement to still deliver a capital programme. COVID itself has significantly impacted the programme delivery trajectory, because broadly during lockdown, a number of capital projects have had to be deferred or delayed as a result of the actual kind of lockdown procedures. So the main thrust of the programme has been to reprofile the cash flow expenditure within the programme, defer some capital activity for consideration in the next financial year, and to focus our expenditure on capital grant income that can support the council in reducing its revenue costs and borrowings. Andy, does that cover off the sort of principles?
Yeah, that's perfect, Simon. So to open this up to panel questions. As part of the cover report, there's the two appendices, Appendix 2 and 3, that give the detail of the items that were in the capital review. So really, I think this really brings our presentation of the paper to a close. So I'll hand back to the chair for more questions.
Yes, this agenda item was put on in response to really business we didn't get time to cover at the last meeting. I'm aware that one of the substitutes has a question of one of our members that can't be here who particularly wanted this on the agenda. So could we have that question, please?
Thank you, Chair. I assume that's me. So I've got a question from Councillor Hodge, two questions, and I'll give you the context with them as well. So building on the question put by Councillor Sean Hughes, I note that all portfolios are, in all portfolios, there are savings proposed through vacancy management and list resources, children's services, climate emergency neighbourhoods, housing and communities, totalling 814k. In addition, 2.84 million of salary budget savings are to be found within resources specifically. There is little further detail other than that all savings on staffing costs will be achieved, quoting, without compromising service delivery, end of quote. And so the question is, how can we be assured of this without any information on where the cuts will be made? For example, within children's services, I'm aware from personal experience that 40k of the savings is due to not recruiting the Director of Music Services post. I can confirm that this has already had significant impact on the level of service provided. Yet through the scrutiny process, we have no idea of the detail relating to over 3.6 million of lost or deferred posts. The CEO's response at the last committee informed us that as circa 82 million of a circa 200 million budget was attributable to staffing costs, cuts were inevitable, but no further detail was forthcoming. Do you want to, you've had, I believe you've had this question forwarded to you, Andy. Do you want me to do the second one, or will you respond to that one?
I'll respond to this one. I think it's probably worth noting this isn't directly related to this paper item because we're talking about the capital programme, but I'm happy to answer the question. So in terms of the vacancy savings, across the council, we, through normal sort of service management and turnover, we do hold a number of vacancies at any point in time. So the vacancies put forward in the recovery plan are held vacancies, so known vacancies within the service. So every single service manager and director who put forward their proposals has done an impact assessment on their service to ensure that they can continue to manage their service throughout the the current period around the COVID restrictions and going forwards, holding vacancies for a set period to enable that saving. So each one's gone through an impact assessment. So it's at the recommendation of the officer responsible for that service that these are valid savings across all of the portfolios.
Okay, the second question is, within savings offered up by adult services, line RP20, review of care package delivery, states that a, quote, a review of existing packages to identify efficiencies, end of quote, will deliver 1.312 million of savings. I would like to know what percentage of the total expenditure on care package delivery this sum, 1.312 million, represents. I have received a narrative response that a 2018-19 review of care packages for 18 to 64-year-olds with learning and mental health problems and those of older patients has found our costs per package to be high, and this forms the basis for the proposed savings. It would be useful to be clear about the proportionate extent of these savings in this important area.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. It's broadly 2% as proportion, so that saving equates to 2% of the council purchase care budgets across adult social care.
Thank you.
Okay, does that finish your questions?
It does, Chair, thank you.
Okay, can I just clarify, did Mark, is your MIS to do with the last item, or was it ahead of Matt for this item?
It was to do with the last item,
Oh,
although I will be putting one in for this item as well, if you'd like.
Right. No, that's all right, as long as I know where I'm starting, that clarifies that. So Matt, you were first down to speak and you gave Lucy's questions. Do you want to ask your own questions? No. Okay.
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I'm sorry for the mechanics of this. It isn't very easy on Zoom. So could I invite Councillor McPhee to then speak?
Yes, just find the thing. I'm looking at Appendix 3 and on page 32, and we're talking about the Keynsham High Street Public Realm implementation. Now that work, I believe, should have been starting in August of this year. Do you have any idea of what kind of delay that might introduce?
Hello, Councillor McPhee. Yes, it's Simon Martin. We've actually been, for Keynsham High Street, what we wanted to do was post-COVID, make sure the scope of the project more closely addresses some of the economic and business needs of the Keynsham community and scope that project accordingly. We've actually also received additional, or we're seeking and have had some MHCLG acceleration funding that can extend the project deadline to December 2021. So we're anticipating that it's only a relatively short delay in the project of between 4 to 6 months to ensure that we can then still spend that expenditure on LGF funding within the funding programme to December 2021. But the principal deferment was to ensure we can rescope the project more successfully to align with measures post-COVID.
Yes, that sounds good. I mean, obviously there are some other organisations that have put in funds, and so you don't want to upset them by appearing not to do so. If it's December 21, that sounds good. I also just wanted to make the point, because you mentioned here about the zero traffic option, and we are in the middle of, if you like, experimenting with closing the high street. So I perfectly appreciate, and we are learning what effects that would have as part of this. But there are two components, three sections really of the high street. There's an easterly section and a westerly section, which are not going to be affected in the future by any pedestrianisation. It's only the middle section. So I was just wondering if they were affected by the rescoping, or whether things were thinking of going ahead on that basis.
At the moment, we've kept, in terms of procurement for the works across all three packages, we've kept them together. So this, whilst the scope isn't changing at the western and eastern extremities of the scheme, in a procurement and a construction sense, we wanted to keep it together. So we go to market on the one overarching project. So we were expecting the timetable to align to deliver all three still as one package.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much.
If I could have as a final speaker, Mark Elliott, and again, I'm trying to go for brevity because last time we didn't have enough time for the work plan. So over to you, Mark, but do take what time you need.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief. So there are a few line items in the Capital Review Programme report which reference the Bath Area Forum SIL-funded schemes. The theme on all of those is ensure correct SIL focus. I'm just wondering, kind of, does somebody want to expand on that? What does that mean? Who is deciding what the correct SIL focus is? And I'm interested in the different statuses between approved and provisional, and what that means. Thank you.
Okay, I'll sort of start at the back and work to the front, because I think it's probably an easy one just to cover the status. So when the capital programme budget's set each year, the whole scheme is set between schemes that are approved. So that there's the approved schemes that are ones that have been through decision making. So whether that's a usually a single member decision, sometimes a cabinet report that takes them into fully approved status. That effectively means the scheme's gone live, it's got its business case, it's got its proposal behind it, approved status is given to start spending money on the scheme. When schemes are held in provisional status, they're effectively pipeline schemes. So we have to put provisional into the capital budget so we can, because it has to be fully funded for the year and the future years. So they're held in provisional status, but there's no authority to start spending against them until they go through a governance mechanism to seek a full approval status to then become a live scheme.
Okay, understood.
Shall I pick up on the
bath?
Shall I pick up on the bar still? As I signed those off. So we're all keen to all update. So obviously, so I signed off the bar still. I think the challenge that the capital strategy review gave me was basically the particular package of SIL that was going through were schemes that were assessed before COVID. So it was simply, is the focus of those schemes still correct? So what we've done is, each of those decisions, we've done a further test just with the recipients of those schemes that it's still relevant post-COVID.
With the recipients of the scheme?
Sorry?
With the recipients of the scheme?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay.
Yeah, is it still relevant?
Yeah. Thank you.
So on that basis, I'd like to draw this agenda item to a close. And I haven't missed anybody who was down to speak that I'm aware of. Speak now. Or wave anyway. Okay, on that basis, I'd like to thank Andy and David and Simon for presenting that report and answering the questions. And we'll now move on to our final agenda item, which is our panel work plan. And I was particularly keen to have time for this because it does really dictate obviously what comes up in the next agendas and what we'll be discussing in time. So if I could ask you to turn to those, the work plan, and Mark, do you want to sort of take us through this? I'm sorry, I should say Mark Durnford, because we've got more than one Mark, apologies. Or do you want me to?
I wasn't particularly planning on doing anything line by line, Chair.
Well, I'll rattle us through it then. But basically, I'm aware of one thing, Councillor Warrington, you wanted something that wasn't on here to start with, which got missed off or just didn't get on here, which it should. Would you like to just chip in with that at the start, perhaps? Yeah.
Mark Dunford has sent an email saying that it is on the agenda. It just hasn't been assigned a date, so I'm quite comfortable with that. And it was just looking at the people strategy. And for those, just to jog your memory, we were talking about the human resource strategy, and we were looking at potentially a gap analysis of skills, which I'd asked Cherry Bennett to bring back to this meeting.
Okay, and that will be then considered when Duncan and I meet with officers to do the agenda planning. But I'm really always keen, as your chair, that we do make sure we pick up any items that you want in there, and I'll include that as wrapped up in the end when I think we will vote, hopefully, on this. So if we look at what's in front of us, we've covered the two items today. The next step, Winston and I were really trying to do a bit of a roll in progression rather than lots of disparate subjects. So in September, the proposal is we do an assessment of the council's big business income. I'm really looking ahead, where does the council want to be with its businesses? And whether, people think it should be medium, short or long. I think it's a good forum for us to be both scrutinising and also coming up with some ideas and policy ideas to feed into the administration. We've had procurement strategy around for a while, and I think that fitted in quite well when Winston and I discussed it. And then we've also got this issue of contacting the council. Again, that was on our work plan before, and I think we were keen we didn't lose that. The sense of really standing sort of outside the council and looking what it feels life and experience to engage and contact the council. And Tracy Long was down to come and do that. And then in November, again, without it seeming very repetitive, I think the issue of the moment is the council business income. So having looked at today where we are, in September, where do we want to be? We thought November could be building again on that, on how are we going to get from where we are today to where we want to be, what's the strategy? And that should fit well in, I think, with work been done by officers for the, is it called the medium term plan, or certainly more than the 1 year. Then the budget structure picks up on something I think particularly Councillor Hughes, you raised, and others did it when we scrutinised last year's budget, or this year's budget in February, before it was passed, really looking at how are the big budget figures presented and providing some input. And the Cabinet member, Richard Samuel, was very open to any comments or ideas, as I recall. And so we were going to have a session, an agenda item looking at that. And then on the 23rd as well, looking at retail centres, the whole wrapped up initiative about the future of our retail centres, the initiatives, the rent pressures, empty premises and commercial estate challenges. And we can review that November date in September when we begin to look at the property services review timescale being carried out by Mandy. So as you can see, it wasn't just so much like a list of agenda items. We were trying to rise to the occasion of the challenge of the times with COVID to really look at a progressive agenda. So we didn't have time for anybody to say that last time, and having whittled away on that, I'd like to open it up to see, are there any items that you'd like to add that you don't feel are in there, or whether you'd like to expand or just add to any of that, sort of the titles of those agendas? So am I, oh, there we go, Councillor Singleton. Oh yes, yes, you can, Alistair.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Chair. At Council last week, Councillor Robin Moss's motion on the voluntary council tax.
Oh, yes.
That was going to come to this committee, is that right?
Yeah.
And what is the timings for that?
Okay, well look, can I suggest that, could we note that, Alistair, that it should be on, and I thank you very much for raising that. If we noted it as part of the bundle alongside the HR thing that Karen noted, and then have our agenda planning and try and fit it in as logically as we can with the officer work being done, and we can review that next time as part of our plan. If it doesn't appear for September, there'll be a reference in the agenda, the work plan, as to when it is likely to come. Would that meet your question? Yes.
Yes, I mean, just in terms of sort of budgeting times to make sure that it can be introduced in plenty of time. That would be great. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, were there any other additions that people would like? I think those topics do give a fair bit of scope to bring things in. So,
sorry.
oh yes, yeah.
I was going to ask, is that too early, November, for budget outturn to see how expenditure's actually going on?
When are you saying you want to suggest budget outturn, or do you think I'm proposing budget outturn?
I wondered if, well, number one, where that would come in priority, you know, or is it too early in November for us to actually see how we're doing halfway through the year in terms of expenditure?
Right. I'm still not sure I understand. Are you saying you want to add that into this agenda, because it's not there now, as I understand it? It's
yeah,
not...
no, that's right. I wondered.
Yeah, okay.
I wondered if you felt it. I think it may be too much to have that and all the other ones you've got in November.
What I would normally expect would be for the cabinet member to give us an update.
Yeah.
So what we could do is in November, we could ask him to give us the best update he can at that time. Would that meet your requirement? And if Mark could make a note of that, we could have a look at it. If it was obvious there was going to be a report ready, then we could put that in the agenda if we could, yes?
Yeah, very good.
Would that meet your requirements? I think it is a very good point.
Yeah. Okay.
So have you got that, Mark? Yeah, he's nodding. Good. We like thumbs. So on that basis, Winston and I have put quite a lot of work in this at the meeting, so I'd quite like to propose it, that put this to the meeting, that work plan, with the additions that Karen's mentioned and other people have mentioned. Winston, as we're partners in crime on this, would you like to second it? Because it's only fair.
I would. It looks like a stitch-up, Chair, but I'm quite happy.
Well, no. It's entirely democratic because our fellow panel members. I just think we ought to own our work as far as it goes. But
happy to second, Chair.
And mind you, not forgetting the work of officers who've supported us in doing this. So if with me proposing a Winston seconding, could I just go round for a vote if there are no more comments? Yeah. Okay. Have I got any? You've spoken, haven't you, Hal? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So I'll go around. So, Councillor Hal McPhee, what's your vote, please?
I'm for.
Excellent. Councillor Matt McCabe.
For.
Councillor Sean Hughes.
For.
Councillor Mark Elliott.
For.
Councillor Kumar.
For, please.
Councillor Singleton.
For.
Councillor Dogood.
For.
Councillor Warrington.
For.
Councillor Mee. For. Now, this is quite something I'm saying. I believe I've got everybody. I have, Mark, haven't I? In the vote, yes? So I'm pleased to announce that was unanimous and we now have our updated work plan in place. But if anybody does feel in the meantime, either myself or Winston, we are here as your chair and vice chair. We will take on board any comments and put an email round if there's something you really feel is important for our role in scrutiny and policy development. So without further ado, I believe that's the last item on the agenda. Our next panel meeting is due to take place on the 28th of September at 4 p.m. And unless anybody knows otherwise, I'd like to thank all those taking part on the panel, our visitors to the panel, our officers, and principally, and not forgetting, anybody watching on online. And at this point, I'd like to formally close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Well done.
Bye-bye. Goodbye.